In Dutton Ranch Episode 8, the aftermath of Beulah Jackson's collapse throws the 10-petal ranch into complete instability as Rob Will returns and immediately begins positioning himself as the acting authority, issuing commands, restructuring ranch duties, and demanding loyalty from workers while insisting he is the rightful heir. Even as Rip Wheeler refuses to recognize his control and continues running ranch operations with firm discipline, effectively creating two competing centers of power. Inside the same ranch, where Rob Will holds the official claim but Rip maintains real influence over security, cattle movement, and daily operations, and as this silent conflict intensifies, Joaquin becomes increasingly enraged over being replaced and starts weighing whether to challenge Rob Will or break away entirely to reclaim his own standing. While Beth Dutton carefully watches the situation unfold and begins calculating how the chaos can be used to strengthen her own position and influence over the ranch's future, and as tensions rise, ranch hands begin splitting into factions based on loyalty and fear, turning everyday operations into a battleground of suspicion and resistance, with Rob Will growing more aggressive in his attempts to assert dominance while Rip remains unshaken and unwilling to be pushed out, setting the stage for a full internal power war where control of the ranch is no longer about inheritance alone but about who can actually hold it together under pressure. And the episode builds toward a dangerous breaking point where alliances shift, authority is challenged at every level, and the ranch edges closer to open conflict between Rob Will's claim to leadership and Rip's unmovable control on the ground. Rip's first priority becomes securing the perimeter of the ranch, but every attempt to stabilize the situation is met with subtle resistance from neighboring operations that are clearly watching their every move. He begins noticing that supplies are going missing, fences are being cut at night, and horses are being spooked deliberately, suggesting a coordinated effort to weaken them without open warfare. Beth quickly realizes this is not random harassment but a calculated strategy designed to force them into making a mistake first. Instead of waiting to be pushed out, she starts digging into the financial backbone of the rival ranch, looking for pressure points that can be exploited. Meanwhile, Rip gathers a small but loyal group of ranch hands, reminding them that survival here depends on discipline, unity, and absolute loyalty. Tension spreads through the crew as they understand that this new land is far more hostile than anything they left behind in Montana. A key turning point arrives when one of Rip's trusted hands is confronted off-ranch, signaling that the conflict is no longer contained within property lines. Beth interprets this as an open declaration that their enemies are willing to escalate beyond intimidation into direct violence. She begins pushing for a counterstrike approach, arguing that hesitation will only make them look weak and invite further attacks. Rip, however, struggles with the idea of escalating too quickly, knowing that one wrong move could trigger a wider ranch war they may not be ready for. This difference in approach creates a quiet but growing tension between Beth's aggressive strategy and Rip's controlled patience. Despite this, they remain united by necessity, both refusing to abandon the land they have already begun to claim as their own. As night falls, the ranch becomes increasingly isolated, with distant headlights and unknown riders spotted at the edge of their property. The sense of being watched never disappears, turning every quiet moment into a potential threat. Beth receives information suggesting that the rival ranch is not acting alone and may have political or financial backing from outside the region. This revelation raises the stakes significantly, shifting the conflict from a local dispute to something much larger and more dangerous. Rip prepares contingency plans for a worst-case scenario, including evacuation routes and defensive positions across the ranch. At the same time, Beth refuses to consider retreat, insisting that giving ground now would mean losing everything permanently. The episode intensifies as a planned confrontation is hinted at, with both sides positioning themselves for a decisive encounter. By the final stretch, it becomes clear that the ranch is no longer just land, it is the center of a power struggle that neither side is willing to abandon. Episode 8 closes on a heavy sense of inevitability, with Beth and Rip standing at the edge of a conflict that is about to explode into something far bigger than either of them can fully control. The pressure on the ranch continues to build as Episode 8 moves deeper into its second half, and Rip starts realizing that whoever is targeting them knows ranch operations far too well to be amateurs. He begins suspecting that someone with insider knowledge or connections to old Dutton conflicts may be guiding the attacks from behind the scenes. Beth, on the other hand, treats the situation like a corporate war, identifying that the rival ranch is likely trying to drain them financially rather than defeat them through direct violence alone. This creates a dual-front conflict where Rip handles physical threats on the ground while Beth fights an economic and strategic battle in the background. A major shift occurs when local ranch hands begin questioning whether staying loyal to Beth and Rip is worth the growing danger. Rumors spread through nearby towns that the newcomers are already marked for removal, and anyone associated with them could suffer consequences. Rip responds by reinforcing discipline in a harsh but controlled way, making it clear that hesitation or disloyalty will not be tolerated. Beth escalates matters further by making a bold move against a supplier tied to the rival ranch, cutting off a key resource and triggering immediate retaliation. That retaliation comes quickly, not in full force, but in a targeted strike meant to send a message that they are being watched at every level. The emotional strain between Beth and Rip intensifies as they argue over how far is too far, with Beth pushing for escalation and Rip warning about consequences they cannot yet see. Despite the tension, their bond remains rooted in shared survival, even if their methods increasingly clash. A quieter but more ominous development unfolds when Rip discovers evidence that suggests surveillance of the ranch, including signs that someone has been mapping their movements and routines. This discovery shifts the tone from simple rivalry to something closer to a tactical siege. Beth interprets the situation as confirmation that they are dealing with an organized force that intends to break them slowly rather than defeat them quickly. Rip begins preparing more aggressively, training his crew for night watches and establishing strict patrol rotations across the property. As Episode 8 builds toward its climax, the ranch feels less like a home and more like a fortified position under constant threat. The final scenes emphasize isolation, with Beth and Rip realizing that they cannot fully trust outsiders and may only be able to rely on each other. The episode ends on a rising sense of inevitability, suggesting that the next escalation will not be a warning, but a full confrontation that changes everything. The final stretch of Episode 8 intensifies as the pressure around the ranch becomes almost unbearable, with Rip noticing that the pattern of attacks is becoming more coordinated and predictable, as if someone is testing their response times. He starts mapping incidents across the ranch and realizes the intrusions are forming a perimeter strategy designed to slowly shrink their operational space. Beth reacts to this not with fear but with calculation, immediately shifting her focus toward identifying the financial networks that could be funding such a sustained campaign. She begins suspecting that the rival ranch is being backed by outside investors who want the land for long-term development rather than ranching itself. This possibility raises the stakes dramatically, turning what looked like a local land dispute into a potential corporate takeover disguised as ranch warfare. Rip escalates security measures further, organizing nightly sweeps and setting traps along known entry points to the property. During one of these patrols, a confrontation nearly breaks out at the fence line, but the intruders retreat before it becomes a full firefight, leaving behind clear warning signs instead of casualties. Beth interprets this restraint as psychological warfare, meant to keep them constantly alert and exhausted rather than directly defeated. The strain begins to show more clearly within the ranch crew, as exhaustion and fear start affecting performance and morale. Some hands begin quietly questioning whether the fight is worth the cost, especially with no clear end in sight. Rip responds with increasing severity, reinforcing that leaving now would mean surrendering everything they have already built. Beth, however, doubles down on offense, believing the only way out is to hit the rival ranch so hard that they lose the ability to continue their campaign. This disagreement creates one of the strongest ideological divides between them so far, even though neither is willing to fully break from the other. A key development occurs when Beth uncovers a financial trail linking the rival ranch to a hidden shell company, confirming that the conflict is being funded from outside the region. Rip, upon hearing this, begins to rethink the scale of the threat and prepares for the possibility that they are outmatched in resources, not just manpower. The ranch becomes increasingly militarized in structure, with watch rotations, secured supply lines, and contingency evacuation plans quietly put in place. As night falls again, distant headlights appear near the property line, but this time they do not leave quickly, signaling a shift from harassment to observation. Beth and Rip both recognize that the next move will not be subtle, and the calm before the storm is nearly over. The episode closes with a heavy, uneasy silence across the ranch, suggesting that whatever comes next will no longer be small-scale conflict but an all-out escalation.